Hi, you guys. What is up? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma. And today, as promised from last week, we are bringing on again Miss Joanna Brittan, who joined us last week and told us some incredible, groundbreaking, whistleblowing information about the boarding school systems that I'm sure many of you weren't exposed to. And I know I for certain haven't been had boarding school on my radar when studying up a lot about child abuse. So her story was incredible. She talked a lot about her experiences advocating for abuse victims. And I encourage you, if this is your first time joining, if you guys didn't get to listen to that story, the cool thing is, or the good thing is, I should say, that you don't have to listen to that episode to be able to understand what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're actually going to pick up where we left off yesterday of Joanna's experiences after she got out of boarding school. And before she started advocating for victims, there was a period of her life where she was working and there were different things that she was doing that actually led to her own story of being a survivor. And a lot of the stuff that you guys are hearing today, she's never talked about before. So this is actually Joanna's story. The most beautiful thing, in my opinion, about Joanna is her selflessness. She spent the last decade plus, about 12, 13 years, putting her life, her reputation, and losing everything in the process that she has to advocate for other children and to bring awareness to their abuse. And she's very selfless in talking about herself and her own story. And I think it's time that we give her a voice too, because as you guys will see, her story is actually very intricate. There's a lot of big names that were involved with this, and she actually wasn't conscious in the way that she is today about these experiences until actually very recently. Just like how trauma victims do whenever they're younger, they compartmentalize things that are really hard for them to comprehend. You'll hear from Joanna that she spent a period of her life doing that in a sense, and she's very cognizant and educated on what happened to her. And it's just time that she shares that side of her story too, especially because of the people involved and how intricately this ties in with a lot of world events that we see today happening with some of these elite people. If you guys have watched our podcast before, Miss Molly Sky Brown, Joanna's story actually links a lot with Molly's in a sense of a lot of the people that were involved. And Joanna's just such a humble, beautiful person. And I think we need to be advocating for her and to give her a voice. And the story is really groundbreaking. It's really important. I want you guys to give her your full attention. And without further ado, Joanna, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Emma, for having me back. Very kind introduction. You're so interested, and one of the reasons I want to share my story is to educate, really, and in particular, I want to educate the Metropolitan Police, who've closed my case twice, and I thought by telling it, which they never gave me the opportunity to when I reported in 2017, by telling it myself, they might listen and they might understand, that I was a victim of trafficking and what that can look like in an educated person who doesn't present as what you'd expect a trafficking, a victim of sex trafficking to look like. But it happened to me, and I'm, I suppose, I look like a privileged or well-educated person who's had a very privileged upbringing, but I spoke to you about Nazir Afzal, who is the prosecutor in the UK who's really championing women and advocates for them, and he explained that vulnerability was absolutely key. And the police were always asking me in an interview that I did for them whether or not I was forced. They kept asking me about force, and I couldn't say that there was any force, and so it was sort of filed and closed, and no digging was done. Nobody was. They didn't really work, and the leads weren't followed up. So I'm giving them an update tomorrow, in fact, and when this is ready, I'll I'll send it. So I hope that it's useful and educational for them, that I can, I had the opportunity with you, who's interested, because they weren't, and I can explain, sort of explain the picture. So I'll go back to leaving school, I suppose, and just run through my life sort of in bits. And yesterday I talked about triggers, and how the very first trigger that happened, where I remembered, was when my daughter was 7 and she went away on a residential on Dartmoor, and I was waving her off, and I had a flashback to holding matron's hand and my mother saying goodbye and walking away and flying back to Qatar, through the entrance, like she went out into the light and I was left in the dark, is how it felt. And it was such a traumatic memory that I'd buried. And I think that the same thing happened in this situation. And I thought I'll touch on another one that happened in Qatar, in the lead up. So I explained that we were living in Qatar. I survived a rape attack in Qatar when I'd fallen out with my boyfriend, and I'd gone back to live temporarily in my father's house, and I was alone, and I was followed back from the centre, which is a supermarket in central Doha in Qatar. And I didn't know, but my car had followed by 2 Omanis, and they pretended to be CID, and I'd hidden. When I heard somebody enter the property, I'd hidden in my father's wardrobe, and I heard the lights going on in each room being searched, and they searched for me. They found me, and then it was quite an awful drama. And then I didn't know what the number was for the police. I didn't know that it was 999 in Arabia. I just hadn't educated myself to think what it was. And
How old were you?
I was about 20. Was I 20? Around about 20, I think. And anyway, they got all the knives out in the kitchen, and they'd locked the back door, and they locked the front door as well. So anyway, I got away from them by they were trying to drag me back in the house. I unlocked the back door, but they were pretending to be CID, and I said, if you are, show me your passes. And they couldn't, and then they attacked me, and I got out by holding the bars outside the window and kicking really hard. I ran out through the garden gate, and they weren't familiar with the layout, and they got a taxi waiting in the desert just outside the garage door. So they would have dumped my body in the desert. They'd have had a complicit taxi driver. So what happened was, my dad wasn't in the country, and we didn't report it because I wasn't meant to be in the country without my father, who was my sponsor. He was working in the Qatar Air Force, as I explained. And later on, CID came to my father and they said, "What do you want us to do with them? They've confessed to doing something to another woman or women, to another crime." And they'd confessed what they'd done to me voluntarily. So they asked my father, "What do you want done with them? Do you want them punished or not?" And my father said, "Punish them," because they knew, that it was an Arab country, and they knew perfectly well what they were doing. And I'd explained it to him. And so I don't know if they got the death penalty or if they got life imprisonment or what happened exactly, but a friend of mine who was CID told me. So that was a precursor to what happened only 2 years later, which I'll talk about now. But I didn't know whether to sort of tell that story or not. But I ended up running out onto the main road. They had the D-ring road outside our villa, which was quite close to the airport because my father was a pilot. And my dress had been torn and ripped, and I got no shoes, and I'd ran out onto the road to save my life. And I turned around and watched the 2 men look at me to see where I was, and that they couldn't attack me because there was too much traffic. And they just they ran to their car and, off it went. And I went to a juice bar at the end, because this is old, before Doha changed and became, as sort of modern as it is. And that would have been, late 80s, mid to late 80s. So Doha's now amazing, but in the 70s and 80s, it was quite a simple place, really. And so I ended up in this juice bar, and that's where I felt safe, and I stayed with a girlfriend after that. But yeah, I would have been killed and left in the desert, 100%. So that was something that happened before. So the reason I'm talking about it is Nazir Afzal talks about vulnerability being the key factor in whether or not somebody is a victim of trafficking. And so it's quite important that I explain to the police why I considered that I was vulnerable. And in fact, in the interview about the second trigger I showed my passport in the interview, which had a stamp on it. The Gulf War had broken out, and I was living in Doha. I wanted to join the British, the Foreign Office as a diplomat. That was my chosen career, because I did a degree in Russian with French at Exeter University, and I thought that I would enjoy a career as a diplomat. So I was working in the British Embassy, doing British passports and visas, and sitting in on interviews, and just seeing what the life of a diplomat is all about. And then the Gulf War broke out, and so the British Embassy advised everybody to leave as quickly as possible, and the Americans had taken all the planes, and it took me 10 days to get out. But my youngest brother and my father refused to leave. Of course, my father was fighting in the Gulf War as a pilot. But I arrived in London on, I think it was the 9th of August 1990, with a suitcase, and really no friends in London, and no family to turn to, particularly because of the Sherborne situation. I'd sort of fallen out with, as a whistleblower, and you're interested in the truth of things, and families can be quite, I don't know, it's difficult. I don't really know how much to say. Molly would say it all, but I'm
throw the table.
But yeah, but I do tend to sort of want to expose things, and it doesn't really make you very popular. So I didn't really have any family who had my back, and you had no mobile phone. I think all the lines were down, so I couldn't connect with my father. So literally I'd taken a British Airways flight via Bahrain out of Doha, which was a war zone, and ended up with a suitcase in London. So I got a job very quickly using, there was a section in the Times called Creme de la Creme, where they advertised for PAs. And I approached the top agency in Mayfair, gave them my CV, and I went for an interview with a company called Holbein Anstalt, which was directly behind Harrods in a basement office. And this was the office of the Royal Family of Abu Dhabi, and they looked after all the property in the UK and overseas for the Al Nahyan Royal Family. And I was recruited by a Pakistani lady called Monika, who was a very sort of glossy, glamorous woman. And I think they'd interviewed about 10 women, and I was chosen because I had a Middle Eastern upbringing, so I was familiar with the culture, and also because they were looking to buy property in the south of France, in Cannes, because I spoke good French. So so I got the job, and in this office, it was 3 Hands Crescent, and it's the same building that Julian Assange was in the Embassy of Ecuador, which is owned by the Abu Dhabi Royal Family. It's part of their portfolio, and very recently a journalist called Harry Davies, Guardian journalist, did a sort of exposure after the Panama Papers of how much property the royal family of UAE own, 5.5 billion, and he quoted me in the article, but I did tell him the whole story, and he'd exposed Trump models. I think in 2016 there was a Guardian article, and he'd already heard a lot of disclosures. I suppose they were mostly American girls, women, then when he spoke to them, but yeah, he wrote a really good piece, so he was kind of quite used to hearing that. But when he approached me, he could see that I must have mentioned on social media that I'd worked for the whole by now stuff. And so he approached me, and I then disclosed this whole saga to him, and I don't think he was really expecting it. But the reason I mention him is he knew this guy called Andrew Lax, who more recently was with a property company called Lancer, and they were in a court case with the Abu Dhabi Royal Family. And when I was recruited, in the office, there were two parts. There was the part where they did the shipments to Abu Dhabi, private plane loads of Harrods shipments full of, whatever they wanted. And I don't know whether it was in human trafficking or, what went in these planes. But the orders that we were putting through were from, all from Harrods. And so the connection with Harrods and with Mohammed Al-Fayed, who owned Harrods, was very close. And the guy who worked there was called Ahmed Obaidly, who was exactly the same age as Mohammed Al-Fayed, but he'd been living in London, I think, since the 60s. And he was, because he spoke English really well, he was the UAE Royal Family's top man in London, their top diplomat, and he was Sheikh Zayed's right-hand man. And I couldn't find any photographs of him when I was researching him on the internet, but there's a picture of him in the 60s as a translator, really, that he's not a member of the royal family, but he then becomes absorbed into the royal family, and he becomes the Crown Court advisor. And I understand this kind of structure in Qatar very well because of my father's position, and my father's boss in Qatar was the Crown Court advisor to the Emir. So he's the mentor. They prepare them with soft power in these schools I was talking about yesterday to take over. And Middle Eastern royals in particular use the whole soft power structure. Sandhurst, Dartmouth Naval College, military, I know which RAF colleges, but they use the whole British elite education system in order to network and create a sort of soft power base, really. So I lost my train of thought.
Would you?
Yeah, Obaidly.
While we're thinking about where you just left off, could you explain? You did a good job yesterday. You asked me, "Hey, have you ever heard of soft power?" And I was like, "No." Would you be able to explain to people what soft power is if they haven't heard of that?
Yeah. So it's one of the reasons why. I mean, I was asked about why prep schools, and the reason for a prep school is a common entrance pass, which gives you access because they're very competitive. Well, they used to be. Maybe they're more desperate now, and they just want the money. But and then maybe not so full. But they used to be highly competitive, and so you needed this common entrance pass, this sort of holy grail, as it were, when you're 12 years old, of a common entrance pass to access top public schools. You can't just pay. So for example, if the Qatar Royal family wanted their children to go to Eton, they needed their children to pass this exam, and they weren't prepared to send their children away when they were very young, like we were. Our parents were living there and they sent us to school in England. They wouldn't do that because they need that, they're not familiar with sending their children away. So they needed a prep school in their country which would give them common entrance passes so they could be sent. And the soft power is really, I suppose, a word for networking. And Ghislaine Maxwell understood soft power really well. She was, educated like that in a number of schools, a prep near Millfield, schools around Oxford, and the same school that Kate Middleton, Prince William's wife, Princess Catherine, attended, Marlborough. So from these schools, one of the reasons for them is networking socially. They talk about it giving you a leg up, but later on in life, you've got really useful little black book if you want it. So that's the point of it, and it's particularly useful in military, knowing certain people who've been through an institution like Sandhurst, officer cadets, and my father went through Dartmouth Naval College, so that's really elite. And it's they look after their own, so it's so they raise their children in order to sort of take over, and this was the role that Ahmed Obaidly, the man in this office, had. He was the Crown Court advisor, but they're usually the mentor of the man who's going to take power, the young prince. So they look after his education, and that's really important. But he knows how then, when he takes over as the ruler, he understands the sort of what that soft power looks like, and how to kind of mingle, I suppose. But anyway, that's what Ahmed Obaidly's role was. He was the advisor to the crown, to Zayed, and then Khalifa was the son, Sheikh K. And there was an article that exposed by Richard Kay, one of the editors of the Daily Mail, and I rang him very recently as well. The article was talking about a property that they just bought when I started working for them in 1990. I think they bought it in 89. It was called Ascot Place, and it was quite an outrageous article talking about all these properties that they had all over the world, that had never been visited. There was one in Spain where they sort of changed all the bed sheets and everything, and once a week, or I don't know, maybe daily, and all the staff lined up to greet Andrew Lax, who turned up to inspect the property, and nobody had ever been there. The guy who owned it had never ever showed up, and they just looked after it, kept it immaculately. Can you imagine the expenditure? And what they'd done in Ascot Place was they'd imported Evian water from France, and they'd filled the water tanks of Ascot Place, this crumbling stately home, with all this sort of water. I don't suppose they spent much time there because they couldn't adapt it in the way they wanted to. So I started working in this office, and I was there, I suppose, for about 4 months.
How old were you at this time too?
25.
Okay, so young.
25. So I was working. I was starting to become, be interested in becoming a diplomat. And
was that your first job too, out of school, that you got?
No, I'd had about 2 or 3.
Okay.
But as I went through university, I did sort of PA work, and it wasn't what I wanted to do, but it was something to fall back on. So when I landed out of a war zone, basically I flew out of the Gulf War, landed in London, and I had no money, so I had to get a job really quickly. And so I used this agency, and I thought initially I'd fallen on my feet. I thought, oh, how fantastic. I'm right by Hind Harrods, central Knightsbridge, and they wanted a bi or trilingual PA. I thought, perfect, because I left Doha like that. I thought, well, that's all right. So you'd have thought that you'd be perfectly safe working for a royal family. You thought you'd be safe in your job. So after a week, one of the perks, I was told by Monika, who recruited me, Ghislaine Maxwell, if you will, she said that one of the perks was Bupa, or private healthcare. I don't think it was Bupa, but it was a similar product, and that I was going to have private medical insurance. So I thought, oh, that's great, So I had to go along for a medical, and she took me to an address, 71 High Street, which is owned by the UAE Embassy. It's their medical, so they bring people in from the country, sheikhs or whatever. That's generally, I think, where they get seen. And I was taken there, and the trigger for this was, the trigger for the recall was an incident in the news where a baby had been found in a bin in Qatar airport, and there were a lot of flights, and I think there were 18 Australian women and other nationalities, and 2 British women anyway, were pulled off flights, and they were put in ambulances on the tarmac and given a forced gynecological examination in ambulances on the tarmac against their will, to inspect them for signs of pregnancy. And 60 Minutes Australia actually made a program about the scandal of it. This was, I think, 2 years ago. It was quite recent, and only last week, I think they said there's a court case, they're taking action against the government of Qatar, or the Royal Family of Qatar, I'm not sure which, but action anyway against them for sexual assault. They described it as sexual assault. And so I saw that and I thought, hang on a minute, if that's criminal, then what happened to me is worse. And I gave a police interview in Torquay quite recently, because it was a separate incident. They closed the rape that I reported in 2017, but I reported this internal examination. So what happened is Monika took me to this doctor's, and I'd been working there for a week. So I had my desk, I already started, and I was also vulnerable in that I was dependent on them for my income financially. So when the police were saying to me, were you forced? You could have walked away. You never had, you could have got another job. It's very difficult to describe it. The combination as well of being brought up in the way that I was, to be loyal and obedient and disciplined and moral, I suppose. I was tricked, and if you look at the definition in a dictionary of a victim, there's some deception or being tricked. So Monika actually tricked me. She took me there and she said it was a medical for Bupa or whatever it was. I'd never had one before. I'd never been in a position where that was offered to me, because normally it's quite senior executives in a company, in England anyway, that get offered that perk. And I then expected to have, maybe my lungs, like a doctor would check your lungs, your blood pressure, I didn't know what they were going to do. Anyway, I got there and it was an Egyptian doctor. I'm pretty sure he was Egyptian, because I'm quite good on nationalities. And it was just him. I wasn't accompanied by anybody, and all it was I think he did a blood test, but it was an invasive gynecological examination, and I was being tested for STDs, and there was no and I think AIDS. In the 90s there was a lot of I think that was when it first came out. They didn't tell me what it was for. He didn't even speak English, the doctor, and Monika was waiting in the car. So when I saw what had happened to the women in Qatar, I said in my police interview, what happened to me was so much worse, because it was premeditated rape. And I'll explain how it happened that I was raped. But I was recruited by Monika, and it was because her boss was a germaphobic rapist. And they'd obviously selected me from 10 women from the agency. And I think that one of the reasons I was chosen was my vulnerability. Like, Giuffre was talking about Epstein and Maxwell in the room, and how they sort of asked questions about her upbringing and how vulnerable she was, kind of like, that's what they wanted to know. They were kind of gauging her vulnerability, I think anyway. And that's that's what happened to me in, I think it was Why I Was Chosen, and that I would have, that I was consent to have, having worked there for a week, an examination like that, but I was tricked because I didn't expect that, and I needed the job. And when I was interviewed, the police were like, well, you know, you could have, you weren't forced. Were you forced? And they kept asking me, and it was actually really upsetting that they kept asking me about force and the use of force, because when you're vulnerable, you know, and docile and submissive, you don't need force. And I just think that the police need educating about what it can look like, because, you know, and they also used an expression. They said it might be morally repugnant, but it's not criminal to do that. Anyway, I was told in my police interview that I wasn't allowed to refer to the original story, which I was never asked about, that I was only allowed to talk about the Harley Street invasive medical. So I did, and the last thing I said, I started showing a picture of my visa in my passport, which shows that I left Qatar on this date. And I said, you know, this is when I was recruited, and it would have been about a week after that I was tricked into this medical. But I, you know, at the time that I had that, I didn't realize what it was for, and I certainly didn't realize that I'd end up being raped by an old man, you know.
But that brings up
but you have
a point about that mind control and grooming. That's the point of grooming and what groomers look for. They don't want somebody that notices the signs and is super educated in what a manipulator or an abuser or a groomer does. They want somebody that's saying, I really need this job. I'm super hungry. I really need this. Like, I'm going to depend on you for something and I don't have anything else. Like, they want somebody who has those vulnerabilities, who doesn't know, right? You said you didn't have insurance. You didn't know what was normal to go into something like that. And they know that. I'm sure you mentioned, I'm sure when they told you were going to get insurance, you were like, wow, oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a perk.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, and oh, so, aren't you lucky?
Right. And that's,
and Monika was very, it was the business about it being a woman, you know, that makes it so much worse. That she, you know, you expect maternal feelings and compassion as well, and there was nothing. And she wouldn't get out of the car. She knew exactly what was
adult, you know, like a child with an abusive adult. John Wedger says it really good. I know we've talked about him. It's not the adult that the child knows is somebody that they love and trust. It's a hero to them. The person that abuses them is the monster, but the person that they see in front of them is their best friend. We're susceptible to that as adults too, to say, well, you're hiring me for a job, obviously, like there's nothing to worry about. You're a corporation. You've had, like, you have money, you can pay me, you know, like what could go wrong here? You think that somebody like that would have your best interest in mind, just like a child does with some type of an adult figure in their life, you know?
So then after this sexual assault, basically, by this Egyptian in the medical center in Harley Street, we go back to the office, and I'm asked to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So they didn't ask me to sign that at the beginning when they first recruited me. It was after a week after I'd had this sex test, and I'd never seen anything like that. I don't have a copy of it. They never gave me one. And when I left, I'll tell you as the story goes on about, I had to sign a second one when I was abducted and trafficked. But anyway, before that happened, and that's when Monika made death threats against my life, and she made legal threats. So it just got dark from that point onwards. From the medical, it just got really dark, and it lasted about 4 months, the whole period. And I've never been asked to give an interview about it, but the more I look at, you know, these puzzle pieces that are all these survivors connecting and talking about SRA and the Royal Family, and some of the stuff that Callie was saying about the Royal Family and sex, for example, you know, they send their children to school, to these elite boarding schools, to Gordonston or wherever. And, you know, what is it that might make a royal child immune to child sexual abuse? You know, why should they be? And I don't imagine for a minute they are immune. So the more I thought about that, and the more I thought about, you know, what Kelly was saying seemed so incredible. Point is, my story ends up with Mohammed al-Fayed, etc., and you're thinking that this is 1990, 91, and you've got Princess Diana, you know, hanging out with him in 1997, I suppose it is, 96, 97, when, you know, before she's killed. But you know, massive sexual predators, germaphobe, gets all his PAs sexually health tested like that, you know, insists on STDs for all the PAs he's going to make a move on. And I think he learned his behavior from Obaidly, who'd been in London for about, I think Obaidly arrived in the 60s, and I think al-Fayed came in the 80s, I'm not quite sure. But they were very similar ages, and they were, you know, as I was explaining about these private shipments from full of Harrod stuff, you know, they were very, very close indeed. So I'll go back to my story. So the NDAs were signed, and in the office, there were sort of two parts to it really. And it was quite dark because it was in a basement, lots of wood, I remember. And Obaidly and Monika were in the far end. And then I was in this office with two men, and I was typing letters, and we were liaising with architects about these properties that they bought. And Monika was engaged. She had a fiance, I think he was also Pakistani, and she went to America on holiday with him. And after she'd left, Obaidly, her, you know, who was the boss of the whole setup, and, you know, had the purse strings, asked me to go to France with him, and he'd to Cannes. They wanted to buy property, so I didn't want to stay in the same hotel, so I insisted that if we went, I'd want a, you know, not a smart hotel, something modest for myself. And I don't know who was going to type letters for the men in the office, because, you know, I wasn't really meant to be his PA. I was meant to be working for them. And I think one of these men was called Andrew Lax, and that's what I want to talk to the police about tomorrow, because I don't think, you know, I know two journalists who've got his phone number, and I gave the police his name, and nobody could be bothered to ring him. Neither Richard Kay or Harry Davies, who told me they've got his phone number, have asked him whether or not he remembers me. And I've got this article written by Richard Kay, and he says, yeah, I know him, I'll give him a ring. Like nothing back. And then I approached, there's a victim called Caitlin McNamara, who was involved with the Hay Festival, the book festival in Abu Dhabi, and was assaulted by a man, Sheikh Naim bin Mubarak. And I have a picture of him carrying the dead body of the man who raped me, Ahmed Obaidly. And she's got a case against the Abu Dhabi Royal Family, and against him in particular. And one of the top, Carter Ruck, one of the top reputational lawyers, is representing her. And her QC is Helen McKennedy. And I've approached everybody about it, offering myself as a jigsaw puzzle piece, exactly like Molly did, talking about the MO of Ghislaine Maxwell. And they've all shut the door on me just because the perpetrator's dead. Obaidly died in 2015 or 2015. And there's a picture of Caitlin's rapist carrying the dead body of my rapist in this mosque in Abu Dhabi. And it's quite a photograph, really. And I'm saying, you know, this is what happened to me in Knightsbridge, not in Abu Dhabi, in Knightsbridge, Metropolitan Police, you know, and it was the whole thing. It was a much bigger operation because it was slick. And what happened to me would have happened to other people. I'm absolutely sure of it. So I said to the Metropolitan Police, you need to kind of contact the trafficking people about this, you know. And I'm really shocked about the lack of interest in it. But anyway, nobody could even be bothered to ring and relax. And I gave his details to the police, and in this article that Richard Kay had written, because in particular, I'm going all over the place. In 2017, I wrote a letter to the ambassador of the UAE, and I explained the whole story, what had happened to me working for the Holbein Anstalt, which is a Liechtenstein-based company, GRAD is registered, while I was working for them. And I attached a crime reference number because I'd reported it to the police. And, I didn't get a reply, and I sent it 3 times. What was I going to say? So I suppose what I need to say is triggers, go back to triggers. Yesterday I said there were various triggers that meant that I came forward because I compartmentalized it. It was really horrific. And so the first trigger was on the 8th of December 2017. I saw a dispatches program by Channel 4 News, and it wasn't Kathy Newman, she did the follow-up, but it was Zinc Media did a dispatches program, Mohammed Al-Fayed Behind Closed Doors. That was what it was called. And it was a lot of women disclosing sexual harassment and assault as well by Mohammed Fayed. And in the follow-up, one of the victims was 15, which makes him a paedophile, which you don't hear. But the first one was a woman called, she was talking about how Mohammed Al-Fayed had asked her to model a swimsuit, and she was speaking directly to camera about him, and that was what the trigger was. And I started calling the police that night. Cheska Hills Wood, that's her name, a gallery owner, and I did reach out to her directly much later, really, not at the time. But as a result of this dispatches program, Kathy Newman did a follow-up because so many women came forward, and I've always thought that I've got this book here, Fired by Tom Bauer. Yeah, this book. And I sent excerpts of it to the police because he talks about this business about sexual health testing of PAs, which, I find completely unacceptable. They can call it morally repugnant, but I didn't give permission for it. And neither can I say I was forced, but I was vulnerable. And I consider it was criminal. And it was organised by Holbein Anstalt, on my behalf. But, there's a level of trickery involved. But yeah, so that was Cheska Hills Wood speaking direct to camera was the first trigger, and then the Qatar baby, the women being assaulted on tarmac was the second trigger in this case. But yeah, I'll go back to the first one. So I rang the police that night, and I had to go to the local police station and report it, and then between reporting it to Devon and Cornwall Police and them kind of sending it to the Metropolitan Police, the numbers got all mixed up and the thing got lost, and it was awful. And even when I rang up, we have a number 101, nobody would take my report. Nobody would they said, no, you've got to report it in London. No, you've got to report it locally where you live. You don't live, And I had to make 10 phone calls at least, I think, just to be able to arrange a place to go with it. And then when I went to the local police station, it wasn't open to the public, and they weren't expecting me, and it was a bloke, oh, can we just sit here? And it was, they weren't ready, and I'd written it all down because I'm not very good verbally. I find it quite difficult to express, so I'd written it, and he read it, and there was so much judgment in what he was reading. He's like, well, why'd you get in the car with him if you thought he was predatory? Why did you? And it was and then the minute he realized that it was rape, then 2 women were called, and they kind of took down the core details of graphic details really. And I had to sign that statement, and then that was their level of interest. And then because he was dead, they closed the case. And what I want to show them is the bigger picture, you know. And so in 2017, when I heard Jessica Hillswood speak out, I'd forgotten all of this. It was buried, and it was really traumatic watching her talk about what Al Fayed had done, and they were showing a lot of clips of him, and very, you know, and what he did, what his behavior was, and that kind of helped me remember some of it. And then I wrote the letters to the ambassador, so that I was doing it to kind of help me get it out of me really, and written down, but also to kind of work out the order in which the whole thing had progressed and happened. So so as I was saying, I was taken then, he asked me to travel to Cannes, so I was taken to Cannes with Obaidly, and he stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel, and we were there for about 2 weeks, and we were inspecting all their property. They owned a huge estate at the top of Cannes with a cable car that went down to the sea, and there was a dispute with the mayor about this cable car and access and stuff, and I think that they wanted to I mean, I was taken up there, but a lot of money, you know, elites don't really bother me because I've grown up around it all my life, both in my education and out in Qatar, where, you know, I always call it funny money, but, you know, they just have, it wasn't always like that because we went out in 1971, but, you know, funny money to that they blow on mindlessly, you know, they change their cars, they don't like taking the plastic off the seats because they want everybody to know it's brand new. It's like, and the import stickers, and anyway, that's how it used to be. It's not now, it's different. My mum only left Qatar about 2 years ago, so, you know, I've had a long connection with it. So I suppose it was an advantage working for them because I knew the culture and I was able to be really helpful in some quite bizarre situations and things I was asked to do, which were really peculiar for the royal family. But my purpose in Cannes was inspecting all their property, and they wanted to buy, because they were panicking because of the Gulf War, they wanted to buy more property in case they had to leave. And I think a lot of royal families were doing the same thing. So in this Richard Kay article, he talks about an enclave at the top of Cannes, and I would have tweeted it because I use a hashtag UAE Royals to connect all my tweets. So whenever I tweet about them rather than Sherborne, I use Sherborne Prep to connect all my, as a hashtag to connect all my sort of comments and articles, whatever about that. And for any disclosures and everything that I've said about the Abu Dhabi Royal Family, I use that as a hashtag so that it's easy to find. And that article, you'll find it if you search with that hashtag. But yeah, it's an article written by Richard Kay, and I'd already written in 2017 about what happened to me in this enclave, and where we were staying, and we had a big lunch with all the members of the royal family on the beach in Cannes in a marquee, and the mayor was invited as a guest of honor, and they were trying to sweet talk him and get him on side about this cable car, and it was, you know, it was just funny. Not many people spoke English, and it was, you know, I was trying to be helpful with my French, but yeah, they had this, so it was kind of looking, and then Obaidly had his own penthouse, and I remember that there were a lot of, that was a more recent memory, because with this kind of trauma, it's all very fragmented, and I didn't think originally that anything had happened until we got back to London, but actually I was assaulted in his penthouse, because I remember a lot of plastic coverings, and sort of, it was dust coverings all over it, because they, you know, they didn't obviously use it all the time, and yeah, he assaulted me there. So that was something I had to sort of get back to the police with, because you have to give updates as you remember these things. So it's really hard. It's really hard. So after after Cannes, and we had lots of meetings with estate agents, a lot of viewings of new properties, inspecting what they already owned, developments they wanted to make to this beautiful place at the top of Cannes. In this enclave, yeah, that's right, Richard Kay spoke about it in his 2020 article, but I'd already written about it, I knew about it, and he mentioned the cable car, and I was amazed that, so he must know Andrew Lax really well if he's written an article like that. And yeah, the reason I mentioned Helena Kennedy and Carter Ruck and people is that I wonder if they represent Lancer or Andrew Lack, that nobody's helped me, nobody's said, what you're offering in terms of your testimony is really valuable, Joe. I can't believe that it's not useful, that it's not helpful to people, and that nobody's been held to account for it, because I was recruited by Monika for Andrew Lax, and my employers were the Royal Family of Abu Dhabi. So whether or not the rapist is dead is neither here nor there. It's a whole trafficking setup with these private planes and God knows what. Anyway, that's why I'm really grateful for this platform, because I can tell it and then I can give it to the police and say, the guy who's I'm updating, and say, this is all I wanted to tell you. I know it's not very coherent because it's really upsetting,
No, you're doing great.
Because it takes me back, it's hard.
So
I'm really good at I'm really good at advocating for my brothers and for other people and championing other people, but I keep getting little voices in me, young voices, that I don't think I'm worth fighting for. It's really hard. Like, nobody's going to be interested in what you're saying. Nobody cares. I keep getting nobody cares. Sorry.
Your story matters, and people do care. And
this guy's such a bastard. This guy, and the third trigger, right? The third trigger, well, the fourth from Matron, but the third trigger in this story was last week or 2 weeks ago. Why I rang the police with my update was I saw that Netflix are making The Crown, and they've chosen an actor to play Al Fayed, and he's playing opposite Princess Diana, who was wearing a lilac suit. And I just found it so triggering. I thought, oh my God, it's like, for me, it's like somebody playing Savile. If you're a victim of Savile, and the BBC are going to make a play, make a drama of, oh look, this chap is playing Savile. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Jimmy,
but I mean, yeah, the actor, that they've chosen to play him. I would normally remember. Yeah, I can't. But it's offensive. It's re-traumatizing to just sort of have it. Somebody you think has been put away and you're not going to see again. I actually thought that Al Fayed was up in Scotland, that he had a castle up there and that he'd retired up there. But so when I saw this, I was Googling, the actor who was playing him, and having a look at if was there anything more recent about him, whether he was still alive. Actually, I didn't know if he was still alive, and that he's back. I'll talk about the place that I was taken to, but he's back there, and he's got his children sort of fighting each other. There's a legal dispute between some of his children, but yeah, he's. I think the article said he's 92 now, and he's living in this estate called Oxted down near Gatwick Airport. I'll get on to that really, but yeah, that he's there kind of trying to live quietly. And when these articles came out, these news articles, so I told you the first one came out and that was the trigger, and then that meant that other people came forward, and Kathy Newman was behind that, and I was trying to contact Kathy and I couldn't. She never got back to me about Al Fayed, and yeah, she did a follow-up, and one of the strongest stories was from a child, so that basically it was paedophilia, and the germaphobe stuff was coming out as well. A lot of the women were talking about him wiping his plate with lemon juice and this sort of thing. So this is what I mean by if people come forward with the different stories, you can see what he was doing. So when he was walking through Harrods, if ever anybody he had to shake somebody's hand, somebody behind him would give him a wet wipe, and he would offer children lollipops, and a mother snatched one away, and then he said no more lollipops. But there was a lot of talk about the germophobia that I could see in the book about wet wipes and stuff. But in particular, it was naming his office manager, I suppose, who organised all the sexual health testing, and it named all the PAs who he had tests done on, and then that he then made a move on them. You know, he'd take them to Paris, to the Ritz, and he'd do this and he'd do that. So it was the behaviour of Obaidly was very similar.
Victims were there that you know of that have come forth that you had seen some
about our fired?
Yeah.
I think about 30 have come forward at least.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was really predatory behavior. And then you have this Netflix documentary where Princess Diana is, watching polo with him. Massive predator, massive. It's like Prince Andrew and his daughters, and they're always around sexual predators all the time, including one picture with Nine bin Mubarak, the guy who raped Caitlin McNamara. There's pictures of B in a really short skirt in an Abu Dhabi school that they're looking around, and he's perving at her. But yeah, there's Fergie and Andrew took B and usually to Nygaard's, to Epstein's, to oh Lord. He had a priest, Prince Andrew had a priest who was very similar to Charles's priest, who was a deviant sexual predator in Canada, a school called Lakeside, where he spent, 6 months or a gap year, whatever, when he was about 16, 17, before he started at Dartmouth Naval College. But he had a pet paedophile priest who came to their wedding. They're like magnets. They seem to attract them. And so you just wonder if, because Callie talks about Princess Diana as a victim. It really doesn't surprise me at all. And people might be outraged and think, oh my God, but there she's filming for Netflix and there's a massive sexual predator watching the bowler with him. And the other thing I'd say about that was, he would have had designs on her himself. Okay, there's Dodie, but anyway, I can't say too much about that really, but I just feel really, really sorry for her, because 6 years before I knew what he was like.
Well, so that brings up a good point, because a lot of abusers, especially that I've had allegations of from guests on this show, we're very high members of society. And for somebody watching or listening, think about what that would be like to be sexually molested or raped or trafficked by somebody that other people hold in high esteem. Yeah. They never get in trouble. There's never a case against them. You're stuck.
Yeah, that's why I'm really upset by it.
Yeah. And then
it's horribly triggering. So so I'll just tell us get to the worst bit. So I told you about Cannes, and I was there for 2 weeks, and I started off in my own hotel, and he complained about me being in this hotel. He had a huge suite, massive sort of executive royal suite, whatever, at the Intercon. And he didn't like me not being in the same hotel. And so I was made to move and have another room in the Intercon. But it was continuous harassment, sexual harassment. And he was an old man. He walked with a gait. He had a problem with his hip. He was already elderly. And, it was really gross. It was like your grandfather, And I was really, what's the word? I was brought up to be, you know, an A model student. I was saying yesterday, you know, really bright. I was a real asset. And then you've got somebody like that hitting on you all the time and not giving it a rest. And then, you know, anyway, yeah, I thought that nothing happened until we got back to London, but I got a flashback to an assault in his penthouse. But I did my best anyway to keep him away, you know, at arm's length kind of thing. I tried
And
really hard.
when you say assault, what did he do exactly?
I don't really know. I can't remember it exactly.
But he
I can
violated
remember I can remember the rapes in his house, but not it's I think I was trying to run away, and I just remember all the furniture and I didn't know the layout and stuff. So there's quite a lot of trauma around that. I didn't, you know, I don't know. I'm just too trusting, you know, like
well, it's hard too, because it's like,
I was there on work, you know, it
yeah.
was my job, and then he's just like, let's go and check out, you know, my property. This is so it wasn't at all on the same level as the royal family stuff, because initially he was a translator and he was a diplomat, but he became absorbed into the royal family, and he added the Al. He wasn't called Al when I was working for him, and fired as well. Wasn't Al fired? He was fired, as I remember anyway. But I don't know when he introduced it, but anyway, they always spoke Arabic when they were together. He and Al fired. So after the intercom, we flew to the Ritz in Paris, where we had meetings with lawyers there, and everything was sort of first class, you know, 5-star everything. And I was translating and taking minutes and stuff, and it was all about the cable car and the land, and you know, the mayor was being a pain in the neck, and how could they persuade him. And then we went back to London, and something had happened. So in that time you had no mobile phones, you know. I was out of contact, and I'd lost the property that I was staying in. They got fed up with me, whatever. I hadn't been in contact because I'd been in Cannes, and I didn't have anywhere to stay, and he offered me a room in his house. So he had a Knightsbridge mansion, I suppose. What was it? It was 43 Rutland Gate, and it was opposite Harrods. So our office was behind Harrods in Hans Crescent, and his house was sort of on the other side of Knightsbridge, and it was a great big house. And he had a daughter staying with him. I think he had 2 daughters, and one of them was staying with him. And I felt that I'd had dinner with her, that she would protect me if I stayed there. You know, I just expected the best out of women. I didn't expect to be betrayed, A, by Monika, or B, by his daughter. But when we had dinner, I noticed that she was treating me with disdain, and I'm not used to being treated with disdain, you know, looking down on me. And I could have done with a friend. She was older than me, quite a lot older than me, but I didn't expect, you know, somebody to not like me for nothing. You know, I hadn't done anything. But yeah, it was the disdain. And the other thing was, when he showed me the fridge, he said, he had a big American fridge, and he said, oh, everything in here is from Harrods, and our cook washes everything in fairy liquid, even though it was from Harrods Food Hall, which is, you know, and everything that we had in the office, or, you know, for the shipments was all Harrods. So it was food halls for lunch and stuff. But we'd, everything, even though it was from Harrods, was washed in fairy liquid, completely germaphobic, as I'm explaining. And I was shown a room at the back of the house, which was, I suppose it was a maid's room. It wasn't up to the same quality of furnishing and everything else. It was sort of at the back, and it had a rear entrance onto, I can't remember the name of the side street, but it was a way that I could get in and out of the property without using the front gate. So it was like a servant's quarters. And yeah, what they wanted to know in Totnes police station was so I was raped in that room 3 times by him. And then it was just the weight of him, the fact that I couldn't escape. I had nowhere to go. I had nobody was in contact with me. I didn't have anybody to tell. I needed the salary, I needed the employment, and I needed the accommodations. I was completely dependent on him and his office
And how
for my
scary to
livelihood.
think like, what if I do resist? I'm all alone.
But
Nobody
it
in
was
this house
also
is
a
protecting me.
process of I was sort of worn down over time, so that I'd started thinking, oh my God, I've fallen on my feet. How lucky am I to come out of a war zone and work for the Royal Family of Abu Dhabi in London? How lucky am I? And we could have, I think we had a tab at Harrods, so we could just go and have whatever we wanted for lunch and put it on our bill or something. I can't really remember, but I just remember wandering about the food hall thinking, how lucky am I, out of a war zone. I wasn't killed. And this should have been a career for life, really. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a diplomat, but I mean, as a PA, but it was all right. And after the rapes, he then took me up to the top of Harrods to meet Mohammed Al Fayed 3 times. And I remember going up in the escalators and thinking how my clothes, because Monika had gone off to America for, I think, 2 months with her fiance. So she was out of the way, and she was very well groomed, and like everything was really polished, and her suits and her handbags and everything was labels and designer, and I had nothing designer, nothing. I just I just never had that introduced to me. And early on in Qatar wasn't really like that. And the stuff I had was sort of, pretty dresses from, I don't know, Indian shops in the souk or something. Nothing had labels of anything that I had. And, I was such a contrast, really. So when he took me up to the top of Harrods to have tea and coffee with Al Fayed, the top of Harrods, he has like an onion dough office. So if you look at pictures of Harrods, it's a sort of round shaped office up there, and we had tea and coffee and petit four, I think. And Obaidly and Al Fayed would speak in Arabic, and I knew they were talking about me, but I didn't know what they were saying. And I had an ISVA. An ISVA is somebody who talks, and then I have had a course of rape therapy. And one of the things I remembered was feeling, as I came up the escalator to come up into his office, feeling transparent, that the other women who were up there could see that I'd been raped. I felt that they could see that in me. And I felt so low. My self-esteem was incredibly low anyway, but having been raped by Al Fayed in his house and being so vulnerable, I mean, I suppose like a slave, really. I don't know how I hadn't been paid for it or anything, and I was just completely vulnerable. But he was taking me up, and I didn't know why. He didn't explain why, to meet Al Fayed. And I felt that the PAs, who were very polished up there, I mean, immaculate, everything was immaculate, and he had huge security around him. It was complete paranoid. So the weapons on display were scary as well. I just, I was feeling more and more trapped, more and more like a belonging, like I had no voice, and I just lost all my confidence and my self-esteem and everything. And I didn't know why. So he took me up there 3 times, and it was always in Arabic, and I always felt that I was like I had a sign on my head saying I've been raped, like it was visible to other people looking at me. I don't know how to explain that, but
You think that was because it was so heavy on you at that time that it was,
I
how like,
just thought you could tell. I thought the other people, if they looked at me, could tell.
and that had to have been so heavy. Like you're working with these business people, you're going to these meetings with these really powerful people in these really
Yeah.
beautiful, expensive places, and you're harboring this horrific thing that happened to you, and you can't tell anybody, you don't know where to go. That had to have felt so heavy almost.
And it was also the conversations between those two that I wasn't included in the conversation. They didn't speak English. They didn't address me. That I wasn't part of. I didn't know why I was there. That was the point. And I think he was presenting me and saying, you know, she's been sexually tested. You know, I've had her. You know, but anyway, what happened was Monika came back from America where she'd been on holiday, and she was jealous that I'd been useful, that he'd kind of taken me as a PA away from the men that I'd been typing letters for, and wanted me as his own PA, and I'd been very useful because of my French. And she came back and was really, I suppose, insecure or jealous of the fact that I'd become invaluable, or I was, you know, in his house. She's threatened him, and he told me that he'd been threatened, and she said, you know, I know secrets about your family, the Abu Dhabi Royal Family. Either she goes or I. Get rid of her. And he said, I've got to get rid of you. So I went into the office to clear my desk. I remember going in and I was crying in the office because I felt it was so unfair that I'd done nothing wrong. I'd given them the best of me. I'd done everything that was asked of me and more. I mean, I remember there was one night I was asked to find, it was in their culture that when a princess was to be married, she wasn't allowed to have any hair on her body apart from on her head. Whether it's true or not, I think that was the case. And I was asked, that she was catching a flight back for a wedding, could I arrange for this princess to be waxed all over her body? And I went through London as a yellow telephone directory, A to Z, looking for somebody who would do this. And she wasn't prepared to go to a beauty salon. She had to have these pots of wax, you know, whatever it was, big vats. They had to go to her as a princess, and she wasn't going anywhere. And I rang A to Z of London, and I was there until about 11 o'clock at night trying to do this, because this is how hard I worked. And I said, look, you're going to think this is, they will pay you whatever you want. It's for the royal family. This princess wants this. No, we can't do that. No. And I failed. It's the only job I failed in. And so this princess flew back hairy. But I always thought it was just the only job I couldn't sort. And I did try so hard. But they said that the vats, because they have an Arab way of sugaring, I think, I don't know what it is, to remove the hair, but the vats that they needed weren't really mobile, or it was too, yeah. But most of the time I was really, you know, I gave them the best of me, and you know, I should have been an asset, and I should have been really safe in my employment. And then what happened was I went in to clear my desk. Monika threatened me, and she said, if you ever speak about your employment here again, and here I am speaking about it, so the NDA can go fuck itself, sorry. But yeah. It's kept me silent for a long time. And a lawyer I approached asked me, you know, did you ever tell anybody that you were raped at the time? And I had to ring up my mother in Qatar and ask her. I said, Mum, did I ever tell you that I was raped? And she said no. And that was the end of the conversation. And I knew that I wouldn't have done because of Sherborne. You know, nobody was heard about that. So, you know, and it sounded such an extraordinary story that I honestly didn't think anybody would believe me. But the thing that I think meant that I compartmentalized it was the death threats. She's, you know, first of all, it was legal threats, and you know how powerful we are. We've got the top lawyers, we've got, you know, you don't stand a chance. And the other thing is, you'll be killed if you speak about, you know, she knew I'd been raped. She absolutely knew, and she was completely complicit in the whole thing. And I'm pretty sure that immediately I left, she would have lined up another PA to fill my shoes, who she could control and handle, because she felt that she hadn't handled me, I think.
That's what I was going to ask.
But I had flash.
Were there other positions and other girls that you saw, and looking back, know that she recruited to do the same thing that you were for? So it was like one girl at a time almost that she was doing.
Yes.
That. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think Yeah, I think Al-Fayed was doing it more. Reading this book, I think he was doing it more. But I think they were doing the same thing, and she was just using agencies. And I expect the people who work for Al-Fayed for PAs, recruitment, were doing the same thing, using top agencies and saying, probably saying, we only want pretty ones. And not to big myself up, but when I was 24, I'm old now, but
You're beautiful. You're stunning. I can only
well,
imagine
I wasn't.
you were
I was
probably
young, and
gorgeous.
I should have been an asset to any organization, and the damage that sort of those 5 months did affected my whole career, and I never became a diplomat. With my education, a degree, I should have I should have achieved a lot more, and I never achieved my full potential because of this incident. So it hasn't finished. I'll carry on telling. So this second NDA was signed. I cleared my desk. I left the office, went outside, and Obaidly was standing outside with his driver, and he said, "Get in." And I got in, and the doors were locked. And don't forget, I was living in his property. All my property, I might have had a box with me with my cleared desk, which I was going to take back. I suppose I knew I'd probably lost my accommodation as well, because she'd said he had to get rid of me, and it was probably in bin lines, whatever I had, I don't know. But so I would have put this box of my stuff from the office in the back of the Merc, in long limo, and the doors were locked. And then so I didn't work for Holbein and Stout anymore at this point. And they started driving, and I asked where we were going, and he wouldn't tell me. And he changed. His attitude to me had changed, whereas I'd been invaluable. He was very cold, and I started to get really scared during the journey, because I didn't know where we were going. And I just thought, nobody knows where I am. Nobody's got a clue where I am, because my father was in the Gulf and my mother wasn't really speaking with me. So, there were no mobile phones. I thought, I actually thought I could die and nobody would know. So eventually we got, I could see that we were driving towards Gatwick, and I thought I might be put on a flight, or I really didn't know where we were going. And I was also a bit conscious that I wasn't, because I was clearing my desk, I think I was wearing jeans, and I hadn't put any makeup on, and I'd been crying because it was so unfair. And I was really worried, because I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go. So we ended up driving into this estate, massive, long drive. And this was Oxted, Mohammed Al-Fayed's big estate down south of London. I didn't know what it was as we drove in, but I noticed men in the grounds with guns, ammunition, armed. And so it was a bit odd. Some of them were kind of like hiding behind trees, and a couple were blatant, so it was this feeling of trapped had got worse. And as we drove in, Obaidly said, "Oh, we've been invited for lunch." So I remember the lunch. So this was one of Weinstein. It was a nanny of Weinstein who was describing going for an interview as a nanny for Weinstein, and she remembers the day really well, but she doesn't remember leaving. And this was the same as me. I remember lots of parts of driving there, and I remember the lunch particularly. So I remember Al-Fayed sitting at the head of a long table, Obaidly opposite, and me opposite Obaidly. And I remember Al-Fayed, it was pasta, and he'd got this huge lump of truffle that he grated truffle all over his pasta so that you couldn't see the pasta. There was so much truffle, and he wolfed it with a spoon. But before he did, he said, "Joe, do you know that pound for pound, this is more valuable than gold?" And then he just wolfed it, and I nearly vomited. It was the most disgusting thing, really disgusting, that doing that, he thought he would impress me. And I was really nervous. I could hardly eat. And I was asked during the conversation, well, it was all in Arabic, but he did turn to me and said, "So Joe, what would you like to do, with your life?" And I said, well, and I suddenly realized, here's my opportunity to pitch for a job, as if my life depended on it. So I explained that I had a degree in Russian, that I'd spent a year in Russia as part of my degree, and that I had great contacts in Russia, and that I could be a buyer for Harrods, that I could find icons, valuable artifacts, if you could get them out of Russia. I was just trying to think, antiques, things that when I was a student there, people thought could be valuable, army greatcoats, badges, whatever, military stuff, whatever people might want. Not that many people had been, when it was USSR, spoke Russian or had spent time there. There were only, I think, 30 students in the whole of UK that went to the Pushkin Institute in Moscow. And I was one lucky enough to win a place. So I was a real asset. I could have been. And I was like, I could do this for you. I could be a buyer for Harrods. And then they carried on, chatting in Arabic and ignored me completely. And we went outside after lunch to the lawn. And I noticed about 20 electric cars, quite big ride-on cars that children sit in, lined up in a row on the lawn, all brand new, presumably from Harrods, just immaculate. And a tent at one end of the garden, a marquee with loads and loads of telephones, huge amount of telephones. And then the children came home with a nanny, I think a Filipino nanny, and I was introduced to them. And this was the weirdest thing. I was introduced to his 4 children as their new nanny. And I haven't got any experience of nannying or children. I had one friend who had 2 children who I loved very much. And I'd been to sort of some of their birthday parties and, spent a little bit of time with them. But, I had no experience of children, really. Certainly not of being a nanny and raising them and stuff. And I was told, they all shook my hand, or I think one was very young. But they were, I trying to think of the ages, but more recently I saw an article that they were that the children had been fighting with each other. There was a legal dispute between 2 of them. I think the very youngest one, I think they said he was 30 something, but I think I remember him as a baby, so that the Filipino lady would have been carrying him. But it was, it was quite shocking that had been decided without my knowing. And I think it was because of the way I spoke. The public school educated, so I speak in the way that I do, and that he wanted that for his children. And I was also shown a flat above the stables where I was expected to live. And then after that, I was shown that, and that's my last memory. I can't remember leaving his property. Whether we walked back to the car, he drove me back, and I emptied my stuff out of the house. But my mother remarried in January 1991, and I remember that I was there at the wedding, and I didn't mention the trauma. I knew she wanted to be happy, and I didn't mention any of it. But between my last day of signing the NDA and being taken to Al Fayed's house, I've no memory of what happened between there and being at my mother's wedding. So I've got this sort of gap in time, and I've been having quite a few sections. I've just started a new round of rape trauma therapy to try and remember, because I don't like having a gap in my memory. it really bothers me, and I want to help the police, and I want to know what happened. So that's it really. Sorry, trying to think if there was anything else to say. But yeah, I remember being at my mother's wedding and smiling and showing the face that I've shown since I was a child. I told you about at Knighton House when I put a mask on when I was 7, and I was always smiley and always good to everybody, and I didn't show my true feelings because it wasn't safe. That you got bullied and picked on if you did. So I presented, and I just remember putting that mask on for my mother's wedding, and don't forget that I'd been threatened, and I believed her, so how I escaped, how whatever, but I think it was all just too much. It just was too much. The guns, the men, the rapes, how vulnerable I was. It just was too much. And so, yeah, that's why I said the latest trigger was seeing an actor playing Al Fayed opposite Diana, and this sort of romantic idea of her and Dodie, and I'm just like, it's a fucking predator sitting opposite him at that, opposite Diana. She's like in the lion's den there, and you see the royals. There's so many sexual predators around them, like they're just surrounded by them, and yeah. So when I saw that, I hadn't seen much about Harrods in the news. About Al Fayed in the news until recently, and there was one man who wrote an article, and he'd said it was a Middle Eastern businessman, and it was some sexual assault, and I rang him up, and he wasn't naming him, and I rang the journalist. I said, is it Al Fayed? And he said, oh, funny that you're not the first person to ring me asking me that question. Like, you just know there's a huge Me Too. So when I got into DM private messaging and emailed the girl who'd spoken straight to camera, she said that there'd been 3 investigations into Al Fayed, and they'd all been shut down by the Metropolitan Police. I'm like, so here am I asking them to ring Andrew Lax and ask him if he remembers me, and could they, and in that case then he will know who Monika is, who my recruiter was, who would have inevitably recruited other women and taken them to this place to allow these sexual assaults by Egyptian doctors in the, presumably there's some diplomatic protection they've got there if it's an embassy owned medical practice. But it's the whole big picture of it. It's an outrageous story. It's disgusting, and I haven't told it before, but I feel I'm expecting Sherborne Prep survivors to be so brave and come forward and be core participants at ICSA, and here's me, and I haven't played my part. So I need to play my part, which is to share this disgusting story so that I can be a jigsaw puzzle piece and say this is what they were doing, this was their practice, and educate the police to say, I think they couldn't believe that I'd been trafficked. Like, I don't think they knew what it could look like. And I once rang Women's Hour and I said, could I come on and talk about what happened to me? And so they have a research, and you have to kind of explain briefly your story to them. And I was telling her, and she said, so you were raped and then you went back and you carried on working for them? Well, that's not going to work, and hung up. Yeah. Some British women, like, that doesn't really sound right. It's because I don't look like who you expect, what you expect a victim of trafficking to look like. But
and we're so uneducated as a society about that process. Like, it's made, when we watch a movie, right? That movie Taken, they make trafficking and kidnapping look like this really aggressive thing that comes out of nowhere. It's obvious. and it's violent. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. Good manipulators and abusers, it's a process. It's a grooming process over time.
Exactly.
That if you do it well enough, the victim doesn't even know that they're a victim until after they survive something. And then they're like, wait, what happened? It's like you're under the spell, but you don't know about it, right? And I think to some degree, all of us can say we've done that. I look back at friends, at boyfriends that I've had. And after I get out of those relationships, I'm thinking, how did I stay with that guy for so long? They were clearly abusive, but in the moment, it felt like that was a connection. I didn't know that I was a victim of anything. To me, it was just, oh, this is normal. This must be how a relationship is, you know, there must be something wrong with me, or this could be fixed, you know, and you look back and realize that, no, that was an abuse. You were being abused, you know, but you don't see it in the moment. And a lot of
people, I was brought up to be loyal to an institution because I was institutionalized for 10 years as a child. So, you know, my loyalty was there, and I was, you know, I think that the job had to get so bad before I left. And I had a number of jobs where the situation would get really bad, you know, before I left. And then once I left, as you said, you thought, why did I stay there for so long? You know, why did I stay with that person or stay with that job? Why did I tolerate that?
But it's not so black and white. We get emotionally attached. Like you said, there's an investment. You have a lot riding on that job. You have to pay your bills with money. You're trusting them. There's a lot of emotions that humans have that you can look at a situation from the outside and you're not tied to emotions, so it can look black and white. But when you're actually in it, the emotional attachments and the ups and downs that we go through and trust, all of that is very complex when it comes to abuse. And that's by design. Abusers know how to break us down in a sense. They know how to hook us. They know how to manipulate. And like you said, they're masters at finding vulnerabilities in people and taking advantage of them.
I have no idea how many women he raped in that room that I was put in. No idea. But I'm sure. And he was an old guy. They were both the same. I mean, he's an old man, Al-Fayed. But it's like they never stopped being predatory because they got away with it. And these are old men, like Lindsay died, you know, and the language he was using in the care home where he was being looked after, he's saying to these carers who are caring for him, come here and let me F you like I did all the little boys in my school. He actually saying that with dementia, and you know, he's got no
filter.
No filter. And it's all coming out, and the nurses, you know, in his old age, are testifying to the kind of language that he was using, and all his language was sexual, and it was always predatory. So he never stopped being a sexual predator, even as a really old man. And you know, this guy was, you know, I think the police wanted to know the sort of the physical part of it. And I think I dissociated when it was happening, but it was the weight and the gait that he had a problem with his hip. But it was just he was a big man. He was a big old man, and I didn't fight. I just froze, I think, and came out of my body.
So scary. You're on a
and sort of saw it from above.
Yeah, you're around all these big men. There's guns. You're somewhere remote where nobody knows really where you're at. Nobody cares if anything happens to you. You don't feel even protected by his own daughter. That had to be so terrifying to even think about fighting. Like I would have had things going through my head like, what if he kills me? What if he violent? What if he doesn't?
Yeah, that was all there.
Yeah.
That was all there because I wasn't even an employee, so I didn't belong to anybody. And he'd changed in his way he was behaving. He was basically handing me over, I think. And I don't know what happened. But in this book, Tom Bowers Fired, he's found a nanny who worked for him in 1994. So my story was 1990. And her name is Pip Dumbbell. And I tweeted it. I took it out of here. But it describes Fired going to her room and leading her to his bedroom so that none of the security cameras will catch her. So he takes her on a sort of circuitous route through some darkened passages so that the cameras don't don't catch her, because he's sort of germaphobic but also paranoid. And I think the wife is living above, I don't know, but the description is of Pip, and then he offers her money to sleep with him, and then it's just very telling, really. It explains to me what would have happened. And then he offers her a job in Harrods, and tries again to sleep with her. It's just continuous harassment, same thing, but knowing that she's I think he insists that she has an STD test, and she agrees and has one, so he knows that when she comes to work at Harrods, he can try and make a move, which he does, and he gets rejected, and then he allows her to work there. But I mean, my outrage was that I should have been an asset. I knew I was, it was one of my first really important jobs, and I should have been entirely safe, and it ruined me. And there's no justice. Nobody's cared enough to look at my story and dig a bit, or I just want them to ring Andrew Lax and ask if he remembers me. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this. I'm like, I'll send this to the police, and they've got my file, my updates. I'm giving them Company's House, his address, and Richard Kay's a top Daily Mail journalist. He had admitted to me that he knows the guy and he's got his phone number. I'll ring him and I'll get back to you, and he never did. Same with Harry Davies. Like, why say that to me? Why admit that and then not get back to me? And the same when Cameron Doley, who's representing Caitlin McNamara of Carter Ruck, I sent him loads of emails, and I tried to call him, and then I got an email back saying conflict of interest, can't represent you, won't even take my call. So what's the conflict of interest? Could be Sherborne, could be Qatar Royal Family, could be any number of things. Ugh.
And your story is important because, like I said, with the just understanding how these events actually happen to people is important, because it's like you said, people, if you just tell them one detail, somebody's going to say, well, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you fight?
Yeah.
The whole process, it happens over a long period of time, and that's very hard to convey to people to understand. There was a guest I had on named India Oxenberg, and she's a survivor of the Nexium cult that was created in California.
Yes.
Very bright. Her mother was a celebrity. She grew up very, kind of an elite life, like very great childhood, very loved, and went to go to a personal development workshop that she thought, oh, I'm going to pay this money. There's a teacher and he's going to teach me how to become better, and ended up being trafficked through that organization. And it's like, how does that happen to somebody, right? And it's easy to look at it, like I said, and to say, how did you not see that was happening? But you don't understand that there are grooming tactics that are okay. I think I'm on here. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. My computer froze for a second. But what I was, there's this process that abusers have. It's not just something obvious. That's the point. They take somebody that to them is a good candidate for all these different reasons. And it's a process of, how do I get them to do what I want them to do, which in these cases, it's, sexual abuse. He couldn't just come and do that to you. Like, you would know right away if it was just this instant. Like, he had to groom you in the process in order to get acceptance from you, which it wasn't. It's just an unknown of, how did I get here? What is happening to me? This isn't what I thought I was signing up for, but I don't know I don't know how to get out of this situation now that I'm in it. And that's by design.
Yeah. I had no idea until you look back on it and piece it together, because my memory's so fragmented, that was that medical itself was premeditated rape. And I said that in the police interview. But I mean, when that's happening, it took months for that to actually happen. And then I think the Epstein case has been instrumental in kind of exposing human trafficking. And I mean, I would never have thought that could have ever have happened to me. But it is, I told my story to Richard Kay, and I said, I was trafficked, wasn't I, Richard? And he said, yes, you were. Yes, you were. And I think that's what I needed to have acknowledgement of, because it just looked so bizarre. And I think, one of the things Virginia Giuffre's, I'm grateful for is her, exposing human trafficking and talking, even the word. I think without that case, I wouldn't have understood what happened to me, because it is quite new, really. Yeah. And I don't think the Metropolitan Police understand it at all. But I do think Nazir Afzal does. And I think I'll send this to him as well, just in case he has any chance to hear it. But yeah, it's long, and but if somebody's interested, they might want to look at it and or file it with my case, and maybe another victim will come forward. Especially, that's the other thing with the Netflix, The Crown. When Al Fayed comes back on the screen, and you've already had 2 documentaries and a follow-up with Kathy Newman talking about, victims who've come forward, that could be a trigger point for somebody else, just seeing him on the screen like it was for me. And I don't know when that airs, but there might be another flood of people who come forward. And okay, he's 92, but I've had 2 predators. I've had my brother's headmaster die in 2016 as an old man. I've had Obaidly die as an old man in 2015. So he's like the last one left, and he's 92. And I'm like, really, really good if there was some justice in the world. But it seems to me he's protected, and I don't know, they keep shutting it down. So, but I, if I'm a jigsaw puzzle piece and I help somebody else get justice, I'm quite happy for that. Even if there's nothing for me. That's why I want it out there. Somebody else might think, oh, that's what my thing looked like. It looked a bit like this because there was that bit of my story that resonates, or this bit or that bit, because it's so weird. And obviously I thought I couldn't speak about it because of the NDAs I'd signed. And there's a girl called Zelda Perkins who's working on NDAs, and I'll send this to her as well, because I haven't told her my story. I don't think I was ready to, really. But in this format, because it's big, it takes time to unpack it and sort of spread it out, really, and show. You don't even really know where to start, because you've got the memories, and you've got the trigger points, and you've got the institution as a child, how it sort of all, and the war zone and Gulf War, and why I was there and why I got recruited, really. And then that was the other thing, Molly talking about recruiters, and getting a flashback to exactly what she looked like, and her polished nails, and the color of her handbag. I was getting flashbacks to patent leather shoes. They were kind of like a fawn color, and how well groomed she was compared to me. It takes a long time while I'm doing the rate therapy trauma, what do you call it, psychotherapy or trauma therapy. Bits come back, and then I think, oh, I need to update my file, I need to say this, but nobody's ever paying any attention anyway. It's sad, really. It's sad, the lack of attention it's been given. So I'm really grateful that I could tell you what happened to me, and it sort of sat behind my campaigning and my advocacy for my brothers. It's actually been really difficult to access, because, as I said, I can fight really hard for other people, but not really so much for me. Yeah, that's what it's little me speaking here. who was abandoned when she was little. I did, when that happens when you're little, you think that you can't be valuable, that you can't really, if somebody leaves you in an institution when you're so young, they can't love you, they can't possibly love you. And I never felt important again. So I'm amazed that you've listened to me and let me tell my story. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Of course, this brings awareness to so much, not just these names, but I try to think, gosh, the term trafficking is so new. How many other women and men have been trafficked and don't even know the term to describe what
Yeah.
happened to them, right? And I think stories like this, stories like India Oxenberg's, where it is
Yeah.
people that don't fit the typical maybe profile that somebody would expect a trafficking or abuse victim, right? That's really important for validation for all survivors who don't yet have that terminology, who maybe don't have their voice yet, or even all the pieces, their memories are so fragmented that they don't have that type of, they haven't received all the triggers to remember their information. It's so validating to know that you're not alone, because I'm sure as you were getting those memories coming back and you're slowly learning what happened to you, that had to have felt so lonely. Like, how do I even, like, where do I begin in constructing this and trying to convey it to somebody or getting justice for it, and that's an isolating feeling. And so I appreciate you coming on here.
I think one of the hard things was the fact that I have a partner and a family that don't know anything about this. It's like I have a whole new life down here. I left London over 20 years ago to get safe, because I never felt safe in London. And in fact, I had a whole series of bosses where there were issues with boundaries, and it was just, I left London to kind of escape the abuse and also the threats to my life that had been made. So I've lived quietly in Devon, and I have a new family and and a partner. So for me to suddenly say this has happened to me is nothing that any of them were expecting, because I'm their mum, and this stuff's dark and old, and they didn't sign up for it, really. It's quite hard to have compartmentalized it and then sort of bring it out, and it not to affect the family that I have. And I'm sorry for the impact on them, because I'm not presenting now as the mummy that I was, when they were born. And I was a young mum with a lot of vitality, and I'm quite sad at the moment, really, dealing with it. It's one thing to go through the whole thing, but then to get it back again as a survivor, to share it, really. It's not really for them. It's not there. So it's quite hard to be in a new place and a new life and say, actually this happened to me. When they actually, none of them really want to know. They'd
Yeah.
rather have them back.
Well,
It's sad. It's really sad.
but I don't even think it's that. I think that's how we perceive it. I think their fear is, gosh, this happened to her. That's horrifying, And as a parent, it's like we try so hard. I'm not a parent, but I'm just speaking on behalf of parents. Parents, they want to be that strength for their kids. They don't want to be weak in any type of way. It's like you've been their strength in their pillar. And just understand that children, like if my mom were to disclose this, I would want nothing more than to be a pillar for her. And I'm sure that your children will offer that same support to you. At least I hope that they do, and you have support all over the world. Everybody that's listening, you're helping educate people. This could happen to anybody, and imagine how many lives, if you would have had that terminology and known this, think about if that existed back then, somebody that you could have listened to on a podcast. Think about too.
Yes.
So that's what an amazing gift to give listeners, to say, oh, that happened to her. And she was a college graduate. She came from a family that was affluent, and that still happened to her. That could happen to any of us. We could all go sign
Yes.
up, or like what India did, go sign up for a workshop that we think is going to teach us something and help us grow and they take advantage of you. You know, we're always put in these positions to decide these things and to trust these people of authority. And not that we shouldn't, but it's just good to have those tools of discernment to know, okay, this is a possibility, and gosh, these are some signs and red flags that I can look out for. So I know it's got to be so hard to talk about this, and I'm so grateful that you chose to, and I'm so sorry this happened to you. And I know that testimonies like yours, like Molly's, like India's, you know, as much as it's horrific that it happened to you, I'm so grateful that you all have the opportunity to help prevent these things from happening in the future. You know, you're paving the way for people to have discernment, to have that ability to be safer, and to see these signs and red flags, and to have the terminology to pair with what they're experiencing and to validate their experiences. And that's such a gift that you're giving us. And you've educated me, you know, that's things that I wouldn't think about. It's like, you don't think about that going to a new job. You just think you're going to work, right? And
I
that's
was always trying to offer them the best of me. So I was always professional, always kind of like, no, you know, pushing them away, always, you know, being a PA, you know, trying to be grown up when I'm so much younger. And you know, I tried to be the very best. And it's a bit like Sherborne. It's like a betrayal of, you know, everything that you had to offer, and they corrupted it just like that, you know, so easily. And that's, you know, my father's put all that effort into my education, 10 years of investment, and they just throw me out with the trash. 2 NDAs, and, you know, death threats to life of Holbein Anstalt, and then, you know, traffic me to Mohammed Al Fayed. Like, that's okay. It's extraordinary.
none of it is okay.
And then you know, the complete, like, the police have made zero effort. They rang up Holbein Anstalt. Holbein Anstalt said their records go back to 1992, and that was all the effort they made. I can't see that they made any other effort.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I said, can you, I don't know, what's the problem with Andrew Lax? Why can't he be found and asked about me? Because this is a thing. I remember doodling his surname. When you're that age, you practice writing your signature, or I used to anyway, doodling,
Hi.
and he had a very distinctive surname, LAX, and I did my X's sort of back was like 2 C's, and it was, I don't know, just because I remember typing letters for him, but I didn't remember his name immediately. But I remembered that I was in this office with 2 men, and it occurred to me that he would have heard the death threats, that he would have known that I'd signed NDAs, and I want him to remember me and say where he was in 1990 when I was going to Cannes. And you know, he was certainly involved with Ascot Place, the property that they bought in 89, because we were dealing with, I think they wanted to build a wall, but there were, I remember the British architects, they're all really well spoken, you know, really, you know, the top architects, you know, it was a very, you know, it was a very proper office. So this kind of thing to be happening there in that environment is so bizarre. And yet it was all organized. And I'm sure that there was going to be, you know, the minute I was out of the door, she'd have recruited the next girl.
But it does make you wonder, like, how frequently does this happen?
How many? Yeah, how many? How many? But I'm glad I've told it. I hope it's useful to somebody. At
Well,
least it's out of me. That's the other thing. At least it's out of me. Emma,
exactly.
thank you so much. I feel like I've released something, and
Oh my
then
gosh.
I can just put it out there and see where it goes, because it's not my shame. It's exactly like Sherborne's shame. Not my shame.
It's not
Not my
your
shame. I'm gonna dump it. And
Exactly. And it's not your story to protect them or to stay silent about. Like, once they did that to you, it became your story. And so if they didn't want this to be disclosed, if abusers don't want this information to get out, then they shouldn't do it, right? Period.
they shouldn't force you to sign NDAs with threats to your life, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, that kept me quiet for a long time.
Ugh.
And it was that, and the compartmentalization. I didn't even remember the NDAs, but I think that when that went in, you know, I didn't even tell my mother. And most people would tell your mother, wouldn't you? I'm still shocked that I didn't tell her
I don't know.
anything about it.
I don't know if a lot of
It's sad. It's really sad that I felt so alone with it all. I'm quite shocked for it, you know. But then I told you how when I was a little girl, I used to make myself sick and I'd be alone for 2 days in the sanatorium. So I'm so used to being isolated and, you know, institutionalized that it's not unfamiliar, you know, to just be alone with stuff like that. So it's lovely to have shared it with you, and I get this feeling that like nobody's going to want to hear it. I really feel that. I
no
really feel.
all. I think we all feel that way about ourselves, right? It's easy to look at everybody else's stories and to think their story matters and little old me, I don't matter. It all matters. You're a puzzle piece.
Really feel that so much. It's just,
You're a puzzle
I
piece.
think it's because I was dumped in the prep school. I can't imagine it's even remotely interesting to anybody. But thank you for giving it the attention that you have, and giving me your platform.
Of course. Do you know how many lives you're going to change by being a voice, not just for prep school, but you're bringing awareness to things that happen daily and that happen to people that don't know it's going to happen to them, you know, and we need people like you and Molly to explain these processes and to help people understand how this system works and to help normal regular, you know, just
Yeah, because it's so outrageous when you think about it.
it's,
It's so like sinful and so depraved.
yeah.
It just seems crazy, but
And there's such a
you,
stigma on what abusers look like, you
yeah,
know,
yeah. Nobody's going to believe you, and I thought, yeah, nobody will. Nobody even believed that I was working for them. But yeah,
and people don't expect, you know, these predators to look like what yours did, like a rich, affluent person, you know, that's somebody that we put on a pedestal. And it's like, we need to
yeah. The photograph of the Al Nahyan rapist carrying his dead body is in the Royal Mosque in Abu Dhabi, you know, and it's all the royal family members are there holding his dead body. So he's part of the royal family, and he's the advisor to Zayed and Khalifa. So, you know, he was held in such high esteem, and rapist. That's a picture of it's the only other picture I've got of Obaidly. One is in the 60s, standing with the royal family when, you know, when nothing was developed. And the other is his dead body. I couldn't see another picture on the internet, so been wiped of any pictures of him. So maybe there are other people who've made complaints. I don't know, but you'd think there'd be a few more. But yeah.
I'm sure there have been. There's reasons why survivors are silenced, you know, and censored and wiped away. Like he doesn't want these stories to get out, and a lot of none of these abusers want these stories about them to get out. You know, that's why they threaten you so much to keep quiet. That's
Yeah.
what people do, you know, but this has to come out. We need to know who these people are because a lot of us are worshiping people to some capacity or putting them on a pedestal that are really horrific human beings, and we're looking at them and trusting them and thinking that they're doing great things and, you know, admiring them and making them icons and idols in society. And it's like, as a society, we need to do better with being careful.
Taking the mask away.
Take
Yeah.
the mask away.
The
See,
mask is slipping. You know, I think they're terrified because it's slipping and people are seeing. And
and the connections are happening. You and Molly and like our whole Twitter crew
yeah,
have, like, they don't want us getting together and communicating and being loud, you know, and it's beautiful that's happening because that's exactly what needs
yeah.
to take it all down.
Yeah, that's how it happened with Cherbourg, with the blog, and it was like dormitory whispers. Oh, he did this to me. He did this to me, and it was just like really like whispers in the dark. And it's not like Zoom, like you and I are talking. These are just like one line on a really old database, you know, on an old website about boarding school, and it, you know, just there might be sort of weeks between, you know, a sentence that's posted and stuff. But I told you I copied it all and sent it to the police and to the independent inquiry. But it was just like little hesitant voices in the dark, left alone for decades, you know, just coming and sharing, and how really hesitant, like, oh yeah, oh yeah, he did this, and then by the time I'd sent it and copied it all, it was a really good picture, endless amounts of disclosures over a huge, from the 50s all the way to the 80s of this abuse and what it looked like. You could see that you could see a much bigger picture like that. With the courage, as the courage starts coming forward, it's just like one whisper, one line, one sentence. He did this or he did that, and I think that's what it's like. It just gets bigger and stronger, and you can see the picture more. And
Yes.
with it is like a spiritual war, a sea of courage, a tsunami. And for everybody's courage, I'm really grateful. Yeah.
I'm grateful for your courage too. And I appreciate you sharing. I know it's so hard. It's traumatic all over again. Like we relive those things whenever we tell them, and at the same time, it's so helpful for people to understand this from somebody like you that's had this experience so they don't get put in that same position without knowing. We don't want to walk around life fearful, but we also don't want to be caught off guard if we don't have to be, and luckily now we have the terminology. We have people that are coming forward in droves. We have people coming forward and saying, hey, this happened to me and I'm willing to talk about it, and I think the more we talk about it, the more we're going to realize how common all of this is and how not alone you are.
Yeah.
Is, that this is very common that this happens. It's just none of us can connect, they've permitted us and they've silenced so many people with NDAs and with threats. And
it's actually Weinstein's PA who has Zelda Perkins, who has this movement against the abolition of NDAs to cover up abuse. And so I'll send this to her and add my voice to her cause anyway. But it's really powerful, this connection. It's amazing.
And don't for 1 second think that your story is not important. This is you're exposing some really elite people, and this needs to be known by everybody that these people are doing this, and that they have, because even if he's old and he's not doing it, a lot of this is generational, or the people that he's affiliated with could still be doing this to other people. And it's hurt
because the pattern was so similar. The pattern was exactly the same between the two men. You wonder how many of them, have learned that behavior. I think I think Al-Fayed learnt it from Obaidly because he'd been in London longer. But it was just, imagine doing that, premeditated rape,
and all
make sure they're germ free, and then I'll have them.
And then imagine,
and the police call it morally repugnant but not criminal. It reminds me of the child abuse at Sherborne, and to anybody morally covering up child abuse is such a disgusting thing to do that survivors coming forward can get no support, no help, no nothing. And they say that they care for children, and but it's not criminal. Nobody's going to face any charges whatsoever for doing it, so they'll carry on doing it, and they'll protect and prioritize their reputation always. So they're really dangerous places to send your children to, whilst there's no mandatory reporting in law. I'd never send my children to a school that was doing that, because they're always unsafe. And they keep saying it's changed, everything's different, but until it's a crime to cover up child abuse, nothing's changed. That's my view anyway. But I'll say good night because it's getting really late here. What's our time difference? What's your time there, Emma?
8-hour difference, so it's about 4 here, so it's almost midnight out there.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, before we go, what can people do to support you, or what do you need? What would you like to see come out of all of this? I know you're speaking to the police tomorrow. How can people support you otherwise? And what do you hope comes out of this?
Well, first of all, I always prioritize other people. So I'd like a lawyer brave enough to take a case against Sherborne big schools, because the lawyer we have isn't doing that. And it needs to be done because there's so many victims who'll come forward in future. So I want a lawyer to go against for the cover up and for buying the school and whitewashing the abuse, because it's called shared heritage, and they claim separate entity, but they bought the school for £1, and so they bought its liabilities. That's my opinion. So there's that. With my case, how can anybody support me? If they want to look it up, as I said, I use the hashtag UAE Royals, and my Twitter account is Brittan at @Brittan2. But that's mostly all about Shelbourne Prep. My pinned tweet and everything. But they can search up that hashtag, and there's photographs, and there's a lot of threads that I've written about it, with the addresses and the places where it happened. I don't know if they can support me. I don't know really what can be done. It's just really to educate other people. I don't know what to do with it really, but I'm just glad it's out of my body. It's out of me. I've told it, and I was really afraid of doing that. Actually.
I think people should share this everywhere. I think that's a good way to honor this story, because it's educational, and this is
I quite like Netflix to see it, who are doing The Crown. I think
yeah,
I think they should know that the person playing Fayed, he's had it's not just me, but there's been Mohammed Al Fayed behind closed doors, and a follow-up. It was about 15 minutes with Kathy Newman, new sexual harassment allegations against Al Fayed, and they should also be aware that by having an actor play him in The Crown, that it might well trigger other women to come forward, and maybe they can signpost them or help. There's just people, when they come forward, don't know where to go, so The Crown could actually be quite helpful if they wanted to be. But then they're portraying a royal family, and the stuff that's been coming out is really extraordinary. So there's probably a lot of help that could be needed.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's like how we were talking about before. For people listening, we're going to try to get Molly Sky Brown on here for part 3. And we will do kind of a connection between both of their stories and talk about how that relates to current events. So I'm really excited to get you.
Oh, that'll be so fun. I think we'll have a party.
Oh my gosh, it will be a party. Yes, 2 of the most badass women I know at the same time. It's going to be a bombshell. So I'm really excited about that. So people listening, you guys have that to look forward to. And please share this everywhere, you guys. This is information that it's sensitive in a sense of what could come about it and the people who are threatened by this information. But this is somebody's story, and it's not just somebody's, but there's probably many people that share these experiences that Joanna does, and they're silenced too. And so this information just continues generation after generation, year after year, just being buried. And it takes somebody so special like Joanna to come out publicly and share these really vulnerable and scary moments in their life, and I think the best way to honor these stories is to share them and help educate other people, if anything, to help prevent it from happening to somebody.
Yeah.
Even if this interview saves one life, how incredible.
Yes, that's what I mean. I was just about to say that. One person.
Oh my gosh.
Quite happy with that,
Yeah.
I'll feel really pleased. I mean, not that I want them to be in that situation, but then it'll have done its job,
But people do
purpose.
Situations, and if we can empower them and touch one person to where they say, gosh, I was in a situation that seemed really sketchy. I recognize the signs and I need to walk away. That's incredible that we can gift that to somebody. So that's my hope. And I know that that's going to happen with this. And I encourage you guys to please share it. Help get this word out. Go follow her on Twitter. I'll link all of her links below. And Joanna, thank you so much for coming on with me today. I know that it's late for you, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's been, Phew, I feel really cathartic, actually. Really helpful. Really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, you fill my cup too. And I'm, whenever we connect with Molly, I know that you're talking to the police tomorrow, so we can update people on, what happens with that, or at least where you're at.
I'll tell him I'm going to send him this. I'll warn him the DI in the case, so we'll see.
So we'll have some updates. And then so we'll have some updates whenever we bring Molly And Molly can update us on where she's at, because she's been just crushing it with her story too, just being loud and throwing tables over and getting her word out to you. So it's really amazing seeing all of this. And, you know, you guys are my role models. Like I think you guys are the real celebrities that we should be looking up to, and, you know, holding high and holding with esteem, because we all have something so genuine and authentic and so deep to learn from you guys on how to make the world better. You know, this whole jigsaw puzzle, it's coming together piece by piece. And it's really important that people are aware of this information. Like I said, if anything, just to help prevent it with somebody else that they know. For people listening, please support the Save Our Children podcast also with Becky and Bridget, and Hatch Truth. All of those are listed below. Hatch Truth is our favorite Telegram page. They support us and give you guys a discount code on their merchandise. And they're incredible with what they've done to really bring people public awareness to the show by sharing it to their thousands and thousands of followers also. So please support all of them. Share this podcast with everybody you know. Subscribe, comment, like, help our algorithms, help more people hear Joanna's story. Please reach out to her and let her know how these podcasts impacted you. It's always nice for guests to know what this has done for them. And I know that her story is going to impact a lot of you. So go connect with her, follow her, share her stuff too. Thank you guys so much. And Joanna, thank you with all my heart for coming on.
Thank you. And I can't wait for part 3. That'll be fun. Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Emma.
Thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys next week.